Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for joining us for our ongoing virtual learning series, The State of Pregnant and Parenting Students in California. My name is Miguel Leon, pronouns he, him, and I serve as the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives with the Michelson 20mm Foundation. I'm a Latinx male with black hair combed to the side, black rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a navy blue sweater. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that today's event is being organized on the traditional lands of the Tongva people, and we would like to pay our respect to elders both past and present. We would like to honor all the ancestral stewards of this land on which we meet today and their descendants living in over 1,000 tribes, nations, bands, pueblos, communities, or native villages. As we get started with the discussion, which will highlight how critical data collection is in better serving student parents, I'd like to first share a little bit about our foundation. Founded by Dr. Gary K. Michelson and Alia Michelson, the Michelson 20mm Foundation is dedicated to ensuring that everyone, particularly our most vulnerable populations, has access to the equitable post-secondary educational opportunities that lead to meaningful careers. We proudly operate at the cutting edge of higher education to help forward-thinking innovators, nonprofits, and startups close the opportunity gap. We don't do all of this alone, though. Michelson 20mm is blessed with amazing partners whom we'd like to thank for helping make today's webinar possible. Ascend at the Aspen Institute, Blue Shield of California Foundation, California Competes, the Education Trust West, and Tipping Point Community. Thank you all. It is our hope that you find today's conversation engaging, inspiring, and helpful in your work. We invite you to join the discussion using the chat, pose questions in the Q&A, and share your stories using the hashtag #studentparents. Our handle is at Michelson20mm. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our opening speaker, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Christopher J. Nellam. Chris is Executive Director for the Education Trust West, an evidence-based and an evidence-driven advocacy organization committed to advancing policies and practices to dismantle the racial and economic barriers embedded in the California education system. Dr. Nellam has led successful advocacy efforts to ensure equity in the K-12 accountability system, create a statewide cradle-to-career data system, address food insecurity for college students, ensure that every high school senior completes a financial aid application before they graduate, and defend fairness in college admissions. Before joining Education Trust West, Nellam was at the National Center for Institutional Diversity, Young Invincibles, and the American Council on Education. He serves on several statewide committees, including a recent gubernatorial appointment, the advisory boards of the New Leadership Academy and Gen Up, and the board of directors of the James B. McClatchy Foundation and Swipe Out Hunger. Nellam completed his undergraduate degree at the University of California, Santa Barbara, master's degree at California State University, Long Beach, and PhD at the University of Michigan. You can follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Chris Nellam. Chris, so good to see you. The mic is yours.
Hi, good morning. Intros are always embarrassing, and that one might be longer than my remarks this morning. But I'm really happy to be here. Of course, thanks Miguel and the team for having us today. I just want to say a couple words to kick us off, and then I'm going to, of course, pass it to my fantastic colleagues, Denise and Isaac. First, I just want to acknowledge and thank the pregnant and parenting students and their families that we're already working with, that we will work with as we continue to build out our work around student parents in California. Of course, want to thank the Michelson 20mm Foundation, especially Miguel and Quina, for their support and partnership. And then, of course, want to thank ECMC Foundation, Imaginable Futures, and the Tipping Point community for supporting EdTrust West and California Competes as we launch the California Alliance for Student Parent Success. So we're here today to talk about data. And for someone like me, I'm maybe a recovering data geek. I love data. I love numbers. I teach statistics. And so for me, data is exciting. And we're here today to talk about data and pregnant and parenting students, in particular across the California State University. Although I'm a data geek, I recognize that for some, data and numbers aren't sexy, aren't exciting. And I think for some, numbers and data are just plain scary or intimidating. And I think we should hold that. That's a natural feeling. Actually, when I teach statistics, one of the things that I track in at the end of a course is whether folks' anxiety about data, numbers, and data has decreased. I think it's so that's a natural feeling. However, I think what we're really here today to talk about are mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and dependents, the folks behind the numbers, right? We're here to talk about their dreams, their aspirations, their talent, their pathways to opportunities. That's what we're really talking about. And when I think about data and numbers, I think about my mom and my now late mother. She was a student parent. She was at a junior college with me when I was just born. And one of the stories she told to me was that she felt like she would have finished had the college been more supportive. And actually, she ended up in the military, which for those folks who are familiar with the military, they make it quite easy for folks with young people and dependents to join the military. They have benefits. There's childcare. There are all the things that folks who have little ones or dependents need to be successful. So her story is one of a college that failed her, and she found another system in the military that would support her and me at the time. And I think actually that's the power of data. It helps us understand, or it can help us understand who our pregnant and parenting students are, what assets they bring to our campuses. And I think most importantly for the conversation today, data can help us understand how they can be better served. The focus today is the CSU. And I think as an alum of the CSU and also just an admirer of the CSU, I think who better to get this right? I think we have a lot of building blocks that we can build upon at the CSU. We have the graduation initiative, which has an expressed commitment to equity, and I think they could easily extend that commitment to student parents, who we argue should be the center of any equity initiative or should be at the center. Another reason I think the CSU is primed to get this right and to more urgently get this right is we have a shining example in Fresno State to show that it's possible, that it can be done well. I think we have a recent example, I believe, in Sacramento State. And so we have examples within the system that I think make the CSU primed to try to get this right. And then finally, we have a state that's building a statewide data system that is trying to make efforts to better represent pregnant and parenting students in that data. So we have a lot of reasons to focus on student parents and their families, and as I said, their dreams and aspirations. And then I think the last thing that is on our mind is we have people like all of you who are committed, and we know that progress is possible when people like you champion these issues at all levels. And so before I pass it on to my fantastic colleagues, I just want to emphasize two last things or three last things. One is that initiatives around student parents and data can start anywhere. They don't have to start at the chancellor's office. They don't have to start in the president's office. They can start or be built upon at any level, at any campus. The other is that our team, as they're going to talk about more in a second, is that there are a diversity of sources for these data and a diversity of data points. Data could live in Tableau. Data about student parents could live in PeopleSoft, Qualtrics, can be all over campus. And I think what we hope is that these become more coordinated, comprehensive data infrastructure so that ultimately we can better serve student parents across the CSU and across the UC and community colleges as well. And so the last thing I'll say, and I think on the slides we'll reiterate this, there are bright spots again. You can talk with Dr. Myers Dillon at Sacramento State. learn more about what they're doing. You can talk to Dr. Mercado Lopez at Fresno State. You can talk with Dr. Chuk at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. They're leading this work. They're your colleagues. And then also you can lean on our team to be a resource to you. So I hope that today is helpful and that you will continue to lean on us, the foundation, and others as resources as you do the work on your campuses. And so I think I'm passing this back to Miguel.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Chris. Well said. Well said. One of the most rewarding things that's emerged in this work is the community that continues to build and the movement that continues to build. It's really a beautiful thing to see. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our featured speakers. With us, we have part of the amazing Education Trust West team, who has been the tip of the spear in supporting student parents in California. With us, we have Denise Luna, who is the Associate Director of Higher Education Policy at the Education Trust West. As a daughter of immigrant parents from Mexico and the first in her family to graduate college, Denise is passionate about educational equity and racial justice. She brings a decade of experience in higher education policy advocacy, teaching, research, data analysis, and community organizing. Before joining at Trust West, Denise was the program coordinator and interim director for Students Making a Change, where she supervised SMAC's fellowship program, developed the leadership of students of color, managed policy and advocacy efforts, and monitored campaign goals to institutionalize equity in California community colleges. Before that, Denise worked for the University of California, Merced, where she taught undergraduate sociology courses. Denise also carried out quantitative research and co-conducted research on racial health disparities, racism, and social movements as a graduate research assistant at University of California, Merced, the same university where she attained her BA in psychology and her MA in sociology. Welcome, Denise. Thank you for joining us. With us, we also have Isaac Alferos, Research and Data Analyst for Education Trust West. Isaac is an educational researcher, equity advocate, and social justice organizer. Born and raised in Buena Park, California, Isaac's passion for community development and educational opportunity is a product of his community's experiences. Isaac has previously worked as an independent researcher in partnership with multiple higher education organizations and served on the California Student Aid Commission, working to keep higher education affordable for all students, making him one of the youngest queer men of color to be appointed to state office. In previous roles, he expanded public-private partnerships in education and developed fellowship programs to support holistic student development. As an organizer, Isaac has worked with leaders across the state to ensure the creation and development of educational equity initiatives and that create community-led educational design. As a strong believer in the power of transformative education, Isaac has been a keynote speaker and guest lecturer at many institutions across California, sharing the application of liberative and abolitionist practices in education. Isaac is a queer, Black, and Ilocano community worker and a proud descendant of sharecroppers and immigrants. He holds a BA in Business Administration, concentrating in finance from California State University, Fullerton. Quite the panel for you today, folks. Isaac, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Denise, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having us all. We're really excited to be presenting today. We'll be presenting on the state of pregnant and parenting students, how California state universities are improving data collection. Awesome, wonderful. Can we jump to the next slide? Oh, perfect. I have the privilege of introducing our wonderful higher education team. Dr. Christopher Nellum, who we shared earlier today, is our executive director. He founded our higher education team 6 years ago, and since then, our team has doubled. Isaac Alfredos is our research and data analyst. He leads our higher education research. Maya Vauri is our policy analyst. She spearheads our parenting student policy work. And my name is Denise Luna. I'm the Associate Director of Higher Education Policy, and we all deeply care about the work of supporting student parents. If we go to the next slide, We have pictures of our team and how we all connect. We all have a deep connection to our parenting student work. Dr. Christopher Nellam and Isaac, both of their mothers were parenting students. There's a picture of Isaac and his mom at his graduation. I love this picture. There's a picture of Maya on our team. She was a parenting student herself. There's a picture of Maya and her daughter as she's graduating, walking the stage together. And myself, I'm a former educator. I also work really closely with our parenting students in the classroom at UC Merced. And when I was developing the leadership of community college students of color at City College of San Francisco, there was a picture of me and the student leaders that I worked with, and two of our students who attended the conferences and events and that we worked on together. And if we go to the next slide, I want to kick us off in sharing a little bit of background at the Education Trust West research on parenting student. We really started our work with a report called Hear My Voices, Supporting the Success of Parenting and Unhoused Women of Color in the CSU. And it tackled the question, how can our system better support pregnant and parenting unhoused women of color to better support them. And we conducted interviews with parenting and unhoused women of color who attended the CSU. And what we found was that parenting students experienced a compounding systemic inequities in the system, including scheduling challenges, inadequate campus support, financial aid challenges, and limited access to childcare. Moreover, what we found was inadequate data was a major roadblock to understanding the needs and experiences of student parents. And in a follow-up publication, we wanted to really shed light on bright spots examples. And one of those bright spot examples was Fresno State. Fresno State really stood out in their actions, from marshaling campus data collection to supporting students with resources such as basic needs resources, and to creating critical infrastructures to understanding and supporting the educational aspirations of their parenting students. And the Education Trust West were really also really excited about our collaboration and partnership with California Competes. In our next slide, we have some of the resources, and we co-established the Alliance for Students Parenting Student Success. And the Alliance, for California, we envision a higher education system where we can equitably support and empower student parents on their path to earning meaningful credentials and securing gainful employment. To ultimately, the Alliance commits to driving systemic change for the system in California and to advocate for investments in resources and services to propel student parents and their families forward. In the Alliance most recent publication, we've shared a policy agenda for parenting student success in California, and we advocate to increase the availability of affordable quality wraparound services. Number two, to strengthen financial aid programs and policies to make college affordable for our parenting students, as well as advancing student-friendly policies, student parent-friendly policies and practices, as well as collecting and sharing data on parenting students. And really excited for today's webinar, we're going to be previewing the Alliance's newest publication, the Parenting Student Data Landscape Scan. And I'm going to pass it over to Isaac to get us started.
Thank you so much, Denise. And if I can get the next slide, that'd be great. So like I said, or like I was introduced, I do the higher ed research here at ETW. And so my goal is to not only crunch numbers, but to tell stories behind them. And so in order to best orient ourselves in terms of what kind of research we have conducted within the CSU, I think it's really helpful to first know what data do we already have about parenting students. And the answer is not a lot, right? So well, one thing we can estimate is that parenting students make up roughly 20% of our undergraduate student population across the state in California. But even that in and of itself is an estimate, because not all campuses across both public and private systems are currently collecting data. And so this emphasized the need for us to be even more intentional about what kinds of data needs to be collected, but also about the stories that aren't being told when it comes to our parenting students. In the next slide, we have a little bit more data to go through. So thanks to our national data and some California specific research, we have a couple pieces to help put together a bigger picture of what it means to be a parenting student in California, right? So parenting students we know are more likely than non-parents to be low income, people of color, women, and first-gen students. We also know that parenting students often face higher financial burdens compared to their peers, as well as a time-valued priorities as they juggle caring for their children, school, and often work. We also know on average that parenting students earn higher grades than non-parenting students, but stop out of school at higher rates. So, as you can see, many of these are national figures that don't allow us to get a deeper understanding of the people behind the numbers we're talking about. And so, this information, though is helpful, doesn't provide campus specific or detailed information about the experiences of parenting students, but does help inform a generalized picture of what it means to be a parenting student, not just here in the US, but also here specifically in California. So if I can get the next slide, this brought us to a place in which we had to ask all the things that we don't know, right? So this is a list of questions we don't currently have the data to answer, and that list is much longer than the list of questions we can answer when it comes to parenting students in California and at the CSU in particular, right? At the root of our knowledge gap is getting to know our parenting students to the detail we know their peers. What makes our parenting students choose the institutions that they do? Do they have the support they needed both in and outside the classroom? Right? Part of impactful data collection is about connecting our students to all of the touch points in the institution. So this helps ensure that there are actual wraparound services that can fully support parenting students. And so as you can see in these questions we listed out, there are some questions that may feel a little bit more general, like who are our parenting students and what intersectional identities do they hold? Right. And we also get even more specific about their experiences, what supports are needed, what financial aid are they receiving, what are academic pathways they're using, and then even more general and more foundational questions like, are they involved on campus and do they feel welcome and at home on our campus? All of these are really critical information to know when we talk about data that we need to support student parents. And so in this next slide, I like to use the analogy around data because I recognize not everyone's a huge data nerd. And I know that I'm in a small group of people, but I like to use an analogy for why data is important, right? And one of the metaphors that we use is the flashlight and the key. First, a flashlight represents that right now, parenting students are largely an invisible population on our campus. That's because we don't have a lot of data. Data that campuses collect can help serve as a flashlight to illuminate who these students are, what their needs are, and what their experiences look like. Our students aren't a monolith, parenting students especially, and it doesn't help us improve outcomes if we continue to remain in the dark about all the incredible assets and strengths that parenting students bring to our schools or the barriers that they face. We also see data as a key because data can help unlock state and federal resources that institutions can access to help build out supports for parenting students. A great example of this are the resources that one can get through grant funding, both federally and through nonprofits. Information ideally collected in standardized ways across campuses and made transparent and accessible can help answer deeper questions on the previous slide, as well as be utilized to get more resources to support parenting students. But the bottom line is that data collection is never an end in and of itself. It's important though. It's a way to shine light on students' needs and unlock doors that currently stand between them and their success. And so with this brings us to our parenting students landscape scan and the work that we have been doing over the last year, specifically about what it means to be a parenting student in the CSU and what data is being collected. So though we are still finishing up this project, we've received some really great responses and think that there's some great insight to share with you all. So first things first, we had some foundational research questions we had to ask. We had 4 questions through this landscape scan, and today we're going to share some of the findings that the research has unearthed around these questions. Look out for our full research to be published in early next year. So the questions that we were looking at include what data do campuses currently collect about parenting students, demographics, needs, and outcomes? Through what mechanisms are these data collected and where is it housed? What challenges are campuses faced when it comes to data collection to identify and meet the needs of parenting students? And how are data accessed and used to support parenting students? Where are those bright spots that we can learn from as well? And so that brings us to our methodology. So first things first, we conducted a digital landscape scan. This was really helpful in understanding what resources are currently being advertised to parenting students online. It also helped us get an understanding of how varied the landscape across the CSU looks like in terms of supporting parenting students. We then shifted into a quantitative survey of our campuses. I'll get more into detail of what that found, but essentially Our survey got 16 respondents from 11 campuses, all of folks who work around and supporting parenting students from varying levels, from upper administration on institutional campuses all the way down to grad students who are working in centers supporting parenting students. And then from those, we then conducted multiple focus groups with survey respondents, as well as key campus leaders to make sure that we can get a broad perspective of all the challenges and the bright spots that we are seeing on the different campuses across the CSU. And that brings us to the framework. Now, I wish I could take full credit for this framework, but this framework was largely created through Maya's leadership on our team. And the point of this is to highlight the different types of data that institutions can and should be collecting to understand who parenting students are and how they can design resources and instruction to help them meet their aspirations and get degrees. So these three categories include demographic data, like who are parenting students and the intersecting identities they hold. And then we talk about student needs data, which is specifically looking at how are students experiencing higher ed and the obstacles that they're facing. And then outcome data, which can be academic, but also non-academic. So how are students faring in their courses? How are they matriculating? How is attendance and completion and their GPAs? But it's important to acknowledge that each one of these, though can feel separate, are critically important. But sometimes they are collected and housed in different parts of the institution, which really underscores the need to collaboratively build a narrative using data across campuses. And so that brings us to some of the legislation that was important to consider. So a hugely important detail for California specific is AB 2881. This law required that CSUs and community colleges had to implement priority enrollment for student parents starting this year. Although the law does not require schools explicitly to collect data on parenting students, high-quality implementation of priority enrollment for parenting students is only possible if schools are able to identify who student parents are in time to offer them early access to registration. So the law, therefore, set the stage for better data collection, but unfortunately, campuses have failed to meet the deadline for offering priority registration that came and went this fall. So we're hoping that our findings and recommendations from this research can help inform improvements on campus data collection and be useful so things like priority registration become possible sooner rather than later. And that brings me to the responses that we got. So starting with the survey of our campuses, we received responses from 11 campuses out of our 23. Right? These responses spoke to respondents' knowledge of data collection around parenting students, where data was managed, and how that data was being used, and recommendations on what data is important to collect. So notably, a focus of the project is placed on respondents' knowledge of what is happening on the respective campuses. For us, it was important to reflect on the philosophy that perception is reality. Because if staff who primarily serve parenting students in their work weren't aware of what types of data was being collected, or if the data was being used, then it's less likely to be impactful to the students that they supported. To that end, we also conducted focus groups with respondents and key leaders across the system to help better understand the landscape of data collection at campuses across the CSU. And that brings us to some of our findings. First things first, if I can get the next one, I think we have animations for this. Yes, 6 out of 11 campuses reported that they collect data about parenting students, which is exciting. It means that progress is being made. Additionally, I have another one, if I can get it. There we go. 5 out of 11 campuses have centered where respondents knew that data was being collected. So both of these are a reflection that though parenting students and work around parenting students is relatively new in its focus for higher education, especially here in the CSU, it is a part of a progress that is being made across the system. And so we wanted to really highlight where we're starting to see growth and development within the space. I also want to note for the 5 out of 11 campuses that said that they have centers where respondents' new data was collected, that we're talking about different types of centers. So these included institutional centers like financial aid, institutional research or Title IX offices, as well as student resource centers like parenting student centers, women and gender equity centers, and across the 23 campuses. That brings us to another piece of information we got when we asked about what type of data is being collected. So considering those 3 categories we had in our framework before that we showcased, We asked respondents to share what specific types of data about parenting students they were aware of being collected at their institution. As you can see, there are a number of commonalities across different types of data. Things like gender and ethnicity and Pell enrollment status were really well collected around all of the institutions, or excuse me, all of the respondents that said they knew that data was being collected. But there also highlighted some areas for growth where data was barely being collected, or in some cases where data wasn't known to be collected at all. Things like degree or certificate earned was not known to be collected, or whether or not students had accessed Title IX services. So this demonstrated gaps in what types of research and data is being collected. We also used our focus groups to get some really great qualitative data. So one of the things we found is that there is broad and growing awareness of the importance of collecting data on student parents' needs and experiences. We got some really great feedback from folks who shared. One shared specifically that collecting data on student parents is a form of educational justice. Something that I think is really, we found really exciting to hear from the folks doing this work, that underscores this need that oftentimes the people on campuses, staff and administrators doing this work who are passionate about this work, recognize that at the core root of supporting parenting students is foundationally an equity issue that institutions can and need to support. And so that brings us to a major theme that we found, right? These are all encouraging shifts in the landscape that have occurred in the last several years. But in the spirit of walking and chewing gum at the same time, we can also note that there is still significant work that remains to strengthen and expand data collection across the campuses and to ensure that data is actually being used to support students. Again, our focus was not only assessing what data is being collected, but also how is it being used at the institutions that it is being collected. And so that brings us to a couple of other responses we found that helped tell a little bit more developed story. First things first, confidence is low that data is being used. 2 out of 11 campuses feel that their administration uses the data to support student parents, right? This lack of confidence is concerning, and it is reflective that it isn't really clear how data is being utilized to better services. And concerningly, it also risks the trust among the institution and parenting students who we are asking to share vulnerable information with. Right? One of the things we wanted to underscore is that if we're asking folks to share information, especially parenting students to share vulnerable information about themselves, it is critically important that student parents feel that that data is being used and that data is being used to then transform the policies on a campus as well. Additionally, 2 out of 11 campuses say that their campus has completed a landscape scan, right? I think it's important to note that though these are both 2 out of 11, these aren't necessarily the same campuses, but campuses share that their campus has not created a landscape scan of parenting students. This is concerning as a landscape scan is a crucial tool in understanding an existing environment, both in what services are offered as well as what needs are not being met. So we found this concerning because it helps underscore what is the baseline that currently exists on campuses through a landscape scan and how that is not showing up for a number of our campuses. Additionally, 5 out of 11 campuses are aware of efforts to disaggregate data. So for me as a research person, I hope that folks have heard enough, but I will continue to underscore the data that isn't disaggregated is minimally impactful data. It's important that we can't get to the core root of larger equity issues if we're not actually reading into the data, disaggregating it by experiences and backgrounds to ensure that we truly know what it means to be a student parent at the CSU and what supports are necessary. One of the great responses we got for a need for consistent data, definitions, and protocols. Again, these are quotes that came from our focus groups and are emblematic of larger themes. So it wasn't just that one person said it, we thought it was important to share. We do think, though, that these are themes that came across from multiple respondents and that some of these quotes best exemplify it. And so one we wanted to highlight says that data looks differently across campus. Outside of campus data tools, there aren't formalized mechanisms to capture data on student parents, which reflected on a need for consistent definitions of what it means to collect data and what data is important, and consistency in protocols for what kinds of data needs to be collected. Additionally, we found a theme that there is a need for capacity and resources dedicated to data use. So this quote I thought was very interesting. In 2019, my campus created a mechanism to identify parenting students, which was inclusive, excuse me, beyond children and encompassed adult dependents. The institutional research office is understaffed though, and my campus hasn't been able to operationalize or comb through the data, which reflected that even in instances in which there are clear set definitions for what types of data needs to be collected, there still is a need for more capacity building and resources dedicated to supporting the actual disaggregation and usage of that data. Another thing we found is that there is a need for guidance from campus leaders on how to use collected data. So this quote I thought was very impactful, right? I would love to see a system commitment to student parents. There is no central message or recognition outside of a profile done a few years ago, and there is no language of commitment to student parents. Therefore, there's no guidance to campuses on how to support student parents. And this reflected another common theme we found, that there was a need for broader guidance from campus leaders and system-wide leaders on how data needs to be used and how it should be collected. So all of this, I'm hoping, though I gave you a lot of information, helps build a broader picture of what the landscape of data collection within the CSU looks like. And so with that, I'll transition over to Denise.
Thank you, Isaac. Can we go to the next slide? Wonderful. So in addition to the data shared by Isaac, respondents also mentioned that it would be helpful to collect data on the number of dependents that parenting students have, and to also more comprehensively collect data on student parents' needs based on their dependent ages, such as infants versus high school age, and to have data to better understand student parents' awareness around basic need resources, parenting student resources, as well as Title IX resources. And in the parenting student data landscape scan, we identified some campuses that served as models in data collection that we want to uplift and highlight today. And we can go to the next slide. One of those campuses that served as a bright spot in the landscape scan that we're going to be presenting on today is Cal Poly State University, San Luis Obispo. They stand out as a bright spot for their data collection as well as data coordination on parenting students. It's spearheaded by Dr. Tina Chu and their full-time coordinator who leads their Students with Dependent program. As part of their data collection process, they have an online intake form that's really accessible to student parents that's available on their website. And it allows parenting students to voluntarily share information about themselves, as well as they have their Students with Dependent program, and they use this real-time data to be responsive to students' needs and provide individualized support to students, such as connecting students with relevant campus resources, coordinating warm handoffs to other departments so students feel connected within the campus. And ultimately, they maximize collaboration across departments and minimize silo to support parenting students. And their Students with Dependent program also collects qualitative data. They do this through focus groups with parenting students to identify barriers and opportunities to provide greater support. And our other campus that we wanted to highlight as a bright spot is Sacramento State University, spearheaded by Myers Dillon. Their parent and families programs offers tailored support to pregnant and parenting students, and they provide office support from pre-birth support services to advocacy and academic advising, as well as education services. And they also have a student parent peer ambassador program for students who they serve as a liaison between student parents and the institution themselves. And the student parent peer ambassador program provides one-on-one help to each student parenting student. And for data collection, their parent and families program, they forged a critical partnership with the Office of Financial Aid, the Office of Institutional Research, and as part of this partnership, they established data collection to share aggregate data on student parents, and they have created a really comprehensive data infrastructure with student parent data to support their program. And we go to the next slide. What does this all mean? And what was needed to come next? For policymakers, we provided some recommendations as part of the publication. One of the for policymakers is really centered around establishing a statewide data definition and data collection for parenting students. And for campuses really need to take stock on the data that they already currently have to make sure that people know what is being collected on parenting students, and also to get aligned on any new or additional data that is needed to begin collecting on about parenting students, as well as campuses can really bring together different team members, such as from academics, non-academic staff, and faculty who really serve as institutional touch points for parenting students. And as part of this partnership, they can support in understanding what is currently being used on data for parenting students and inform best practices and leverage data to support in creating and changing policies at a campus level. And for the CSU Chancellor's Office, they can support in coordinating across campuses in addition to sharing best practices, providing guidance, greater guidance, and really to ultimately create a system focused on supporting parenting students in across our CSU campuses. And then what is next for the Education Trust West? Really to build upon our student parent landscape scan on our next slide. Thank you. We're really going to jump in and learn about directly from parenting students about their experiences at CSU campuses. We're going to be conducting a CSU sense of belonging survey that we're really excited about because we know that the data is not just numbers, it's the lives and the stories, and the best source of data on parenting students is parenting students themselves. We're really excited about this upcoming project. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to pass it over back to Miguel for our Q&A section. I know we got a couple of questions coming in.
Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much, Isaac. Really appreciate the information. I'll note for our audience, these are preliminary findings, right? Your full report will be coming out. Remind me again, when?
I believe we have set for February.
Fantastic, in February. So appreciate everyone's insight in the chat, all of the comments and examples of efforts going on throughout the state. We actually did have some questions come in from registrants. As folks registered, they were given the option to drop in a question. We'll start there. One broad question that came up, which is the main issue for student parents as they attend universities? Sort of a broad question, but a good sort of point to start off.
Denise, I can start us off if that works. I think one of the things that the landscape scan demonstrated is the lack of information that we can really pull together from our different campuses. So I'll try to tackle the broad nature of the question. But I think one of the biggest issues that parenting students face is the lack of information, right? That there is just not a lot of information, and it's incumbent on the parenting student oftentimes to go find what resources exist on their campuses and to find and reach out to build support. I think if we're going to talk about supporting and the nature of this work that is at the core root an equity issue, it's also about how institutions can really highlight the support that they're bringing to parenting students to make it easy so any student who comes on campus is well aware of what supports are offered specifically for parenting students.
Thank you for that, Isaac. And oftentimes that is framed as a family-friendly campus, right? Making students feel welcome, letting them know of the resources that are available. Can you expand a little bit about or upon that? What does a family-friendly campus consist of? And from the information that y'all have been surfacing, how does this data make policy possible? Future policy plays possible in support of student parents?
Yeah, so one of the things that we found through our focus groups, and our focus groups conducted had a number of folks involved from different campuses at varying levels, of folks who work directly with students and folks who are higher up on the more administrative side of things. And one of the things that was consistently highlighted was the ways that institutions themselves aren't always designed and oriented to supporting parenting students and including parenting students actively in the work and the fabric of the institution. So in part, it means what types of like childcare are being provided, and what hours they're being provided and if that works for student schedule. But we also heard a number of really great insights about whether or not events that are happening on campus are family-friendly events and whether or not they're actually inclusive of parenting students. I do want to highlight, though, that these types of questions are really critical, and that's actually what's informing, as Denise shared, our upcoming student experience research work to get even more into the details from a student perspective from a parenting student perspective of what supports are necessary, what experiences are like, challenges that they face to kind of add to. Our goal is to have both pieces of research exist in tandem with each other, such that one that describes what data needs to be collected and the other that emphasizes the experiences of parenting students help inform a broader picture of the landscape of what it means to be a parenting student in the CSU.
Thank you for that, Isaac. Another question that came in, and you might have alluded to this earlier in terms of highlighting bright spots, but how can other universities throughout the state of California implement a pregnant and parenting student program if one isn't available? And sort of tied to this question, sometimes data alone doesn't convince leaders, right? So strategies for telling compelling stories with data and hopefully nudging in that direction of increased programming and a lens or a focus on student parents.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways of doing this, right? A number of institutions have formalized centers that are specifically supporting parenting students. A number of institutions don't, and that may be for a number of different reasons. Each one of our campuses are very different. One thing that did show out is that there is a need for a campus-based essentially thought process and um, approach to how we engage parenting students. So a number of campuses shared about clubs that parenting students created to help support each other, which was really helpful in not only creating a safe space on campus, but was also really helpful in then demonstrating the need for a center, right? So the process looked a little different, and the process is going to look a little different across all the campuses. I know, though, that numbers don't inherently change minds and that experiences do. Um, I do think it's important to recognize that student experiences and the experiences of parenting students and the staff members supporting them are also really valuable data, right? So I think it's about using both the quantitative and qualitative data to tell broader stories to institutional leaders. And on the other side of that, highlighting what institutions are doing things really well to demonstrate both that progress can be made, that other institutions are doing it, and a little bit to engage a competitive nature around campuses to want to continually show up and demonstrate that they too are able to support parenting students. And also to fight against this misconception that supporting parenting students is going to be almost impossible at institutions, but that there are many different ways that can do that. But also to highlight that there are faculty and parenting students, or excuse me, parenting students and faculty supporting parenting students and staff supporting parenting students at every institution, whether or not we realize it, which emphasizes the need to say, how do we engage folks on campuses who understand this campus better, who know the community better? How do we create agency there so that they can help give direction to create a campus environment and a parenting students environment that is directly tailored to supporting folks on that campus?
Definitely. And shout out to everyone in our audience that is on the front lines. We know that a lot of you are practitioners and every single day show up and show out for student parents. So thank you for everything that you do. Question from our Q&A that just came in. What are your thoughts on including data collection for parents of children with atypical behavior/abilities related to diagnosis, such as, but not limited to, autism spectrum disorder?
So we play a balancing act when we are collecting data to make sure that we're collecting data that can be useful and help give direction to how we change policies while also um, respecting the privacy of folks that we're collecting data from. And so I am an avid fan of collecting to a certain extent as much data as we can. But I also feel like I need to put an asterisk on that and say it's also incumbent that institutionally we're clearly demonstrating how that data is being used, which is why one of the recommendations that we wanted to highlight was specifically about how do we highlight to the community very publicly how data is being used to transform the campus environment and change policies to help build trust, right? And so I think as much as I think that that data can be useful, I think that we still have to do work institutionally to build trust over time to demonstrate that that data is going to be impactful and that we aren't putting folks at risk in collecting that information.
Thank you for that, Isaac. Definitely. And part of that trust building is helping and supporting during critical moments and critical transitions. We had a Q&A come in specifically asking about the transition from K-12 to university or college. Is there a way to collaborate with districts and colleges as folks transition to new systems?
I feel like, is there a way? Yes, though that is a very simple answer to a much more complex policy problem, right? In fact, I think there's actually a page out of the book that we can take around very similarly for things like dual enrollment that demonstrate how institutions can build partnerships with each other. I can dream of an ideal in which parenting students transferring in would have a perfectly warm handoff from one support service to another and build that connection. How we actually create it has a lot to do with the ways that institutions build connections with each other. In the meantime, though, because I realize saying, let's just wait till the institution builds a connection with its local community colleges, does not get us quickly enough to where we need to be in terms of supporting parenting students. I think a long way can be done in terms of staffing, support, and having collaborative meetings between staffers at different institutions within the same area about how to create some type of pipeline support for transitioning parenting students. I also think that there's the opportunity for parenting student clubs that may exist on a CSU campus and may exist on a community college campus, and even if they don't, extending that, right? How can we support so that even we don't have to wait for an institution to make those changes, but we can also learn very early on what types of supports are going to work for that pipeline.
Definitely. And Isaac, as a self-proclaimed data nerd, you're gonna enjoy this next question. Is any of the data collected asking about healthcare coverage for parent and child? And broadly speaking, how often is data collected? And the last part to this, is it confirmed that Cradle to Career will be able to track students with dependents?
I think I can answer most of those with the phrase "it depends," which is not detailed enough. But to kind of go through that, so some types of, I would say, peripheral information around healthcare data collection is happening at different campuses, but I don't think there is any direct question, though I'll have to dive back in. Um, to our knowledge, there isn't any direct question asking about healthcare coverage. Though there is a reflection from our focus groups from staffers that that is a need to ask about what types of financial services are needed, which includes food, housing, healthcare, all of those supports, not just for the parent, but also for their children as well, right? In terms of whether or not that data will be helpful, I think it is really helpful. The best way to do that, I think, I wish I could provide better guidance, but one of the things we found is that institutions are collecting data at different times and in different ways. So, and each one is reflective of where the institution is at. So some campuses are collecting data pretty frequently, which is helpful, but they also want to be careful and we want to be cognizant of information overload on students, right? If we're sending out mass notifications consistently to students, oftentimes they may miss it. And so there's like a balancing act that needs to happen between making sure that people have access and know that data is being collected and feel that they can input that data while also not being inundated and asked too often. Parenting students, though, as a identity is one that can happen at any time during one's educational experience. So we do know some institutions that, or at the very least, the CSU does collect it when students do go through Cal State Apply. but that will only identify a student right when they enter the CSU. And a student can become a parent at any point. So at that point, it then becomes incumbent on the institution to say, how often can we collect? And so from that, we saw some really interesting success points from different institutions that were collecting around the same times that students were enrolling for classes, which I think those campuses found a solid balancing act after working with student parents to get their feedback, as well as working with administrative, like institutional research to say, hey, is this a time frame that works well enough to make sure that we can actually collect that data? That says that, okay, if we can collect semesterly or quarterly, that starts to get a little bit closer to being able to address needs faster. But that is just about collecting data. I think having centers on campus that support parenting students and dedicated staff that are known to support parenting students also helps if in the middle of a semester a student has a child or recognizes that they are a parenting student, that they know that those services are there. So that way, not only are they more likely to fill out data on the next round of data collection, but they're also able to get access to services even on their own volition, even if they did not self-report as a parenting student in the last round of data collection.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Thank you very much, Denise. Folks, there are way too many questions than we have time for. We really, really appreciate the engagement, the passion that's coming through on all of the comments in the chat, and the questions themselves. Definitely shout out to folks at the CSU, at the Chancellor's Office. I know that there was a comment in the chat stating that the CSU did meet its deadline for AB 2881 at all 23 campuses. So we appreciate for that clarity, and we'll frame it in our follow-up email to reflect that. So appreciate your efforts. It's a community. It's a movement. We are all in this together, rowing in the same direction. And so we hope that you feel that love and support from the foundation, from ETW, and all the other folks in this space. So friends, we hope that you walk away from today's event informed, inspired, and better equipped to support pregnant and parenting students on your campus. The State of Pregnant and Parenting Students in California was presented by the Michelson 20mm Foundation as part of our mission to advance equity for all students and families. We want to once again thank our partners, Ascend at the Aspen Institute, Blue Shield of California Foundation, California Competes, the Education Trust West, and Tipping Point Community for making today happen. We invite you to join us on this journey. Continue to ask questions about the work that is being done. How are you serving pregnant and parenting students? How's your system and/or campus doing that? Who are they? Who is the student population? How many are they? Where are they? And how are we reaching them? How are their voices being heard and incorporated into your equity work? All very important things as we progress in this work. The recording of today's discussion will be posted on our YouTube channel, the Michelson 20mm Foundation, and will be emailed to you all by tomorrow. To learn more about our work with pregnant and parenting students, visit our website using the link in the chat. Additionally, if you or your organization want to become part of our work focused on supporting pregnant and parenting students, please reach out to me personally at miguel@20mm.org. You can also stay engaged by signing up for our newsletter at 20mm.org to receive news and updates about our pregnant and parenting student project, as well as our other events and programs. In addition, hot off the presses, save the date, folks. We have secured August 27th and 28th, 2024 for our second Student Parent Summit. Our first gathering this past September brought together over 130 practitioners, advocates, and allies, as well as student parents, to continue to build the movement in support of the student population. We hope you will join us. More information will follow in the coming weeks. Again, save the date, August 27th and 28th, 2024. More info to come. Thanks again for joining us today and for centering the needs of pregnant and parenting students and everything that you do. So thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.